Welcome everybody once again to the Latino Book and Family Festivals. Today we have two award-winning authors here with us today. Oh, where's my screen? There you go. Hi, Ruth and Jorge, and Edward will be helping us moderate this session for us. All right, so let's get started by hearing a little bit about the authors first, and then we go into a question and answer after. Let me go ahead and introduce Ruth first. Ruth Behar is a storyteller, traveler, memoirist, poet, teacher, and public speaker. She's acclaimed for the compassion she brings to her quest to understand the depth of the human experience. She made her fiction debut with her Pura Belpre award-winning novel, Lucky Broken Girl, which explores how the worst of wounds can teach a child a lesson about the fragile, precious beauty of life. Her recent novel, Letters from Cuba, inspired by the story of her maternal grandmother's courageous efforts to save her Polish Jewish family, was named a Sidney Taylor Notable Book and received an International Latino Book Award. She was born in Havana, Cuba. She grew up in New York, and she has also lived in Spain and Mexico. She was the first Latina to win a MacArthur Genius Grant and has received multiple honors. Recently elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, she is an anthropology professor at the University of Michigan and lives in Ann Arbor, Michigan. More information at ruthbehar.com. Ruth, can you tell us your story?
Thank you so much for the introduction. That was beautiful. And I'm so incredibly honored to be here. Thank you so much for having me. Well, let me see where I can start. Well, you already know I was born in Cuba, so I came as a refugee girl, as an immigrant girl in the 60s with my family. We went to New York. I was about 5 years old. And when we arrived, of course, I didn't speak a word of English. And so that was very, very difficult. And my parents didn't either. And one of the things I vividly remember, this is before there were ESL programs, is that I was put in the so-called dumb class, and in the class with the kids who were struggling, the kids that didn't behave that well. And I was in that class for about 2 years until I picked up enough English. And so I always remembered that experience, and how difficult that was, and how much I struggled to learn English so that I could belong. The other thing that happened in my childhood, and it's the focus of my first novel, Lucky Broken Girl, is that soon after we arrived from Cuba, my poor parents were struggling. My father was working 3 jobs to pay for everything, and we ended up in a terrible car accident, and I hurt my leg. And I was in a body cast for close to a year. I had to stay in bed. I couldn't move. My mother had to take care of me. It was a really difficult time. But it was also a time of a lot of hope because my public school in New York, in Queens, New York, amazingly, they were very concerned about me, and they sent a teacher to the house, a tutor, who would come and teach me right by my bedside, and she would bring books. And it was so amazing because we didn't have any books at home. Books were not something that my parents could afford at the time. And she would bring me all these books. And that was when I became a reader, and I came to really love stories and to love reading at a time when I couldn't move, I couldn't get out of my bed, but through stories, I transported myself to other worlds. And so books gave me a lot of hope. And then when I came out of the cast, I became a girl who really liked to read, a very contemplative kind of child. My brother tells me that I was very active before this car accident, but afterwards I changed a lot, and I became very much a contemplative girl who liked to read. And I think that set me on my path. I eventually went to college, wanted to be a writer, but then I also discovered anthropology. I loved Spanish and loved the Spanish language. I grew up hearing Spanish at home. My parents and the whole family spoke only in Spanish at home, and I just loved the language, and I loved hearing all the stories about Cuba. And so all of that led me into anthropology, a field where I could travel to different places. And I lived in different Spanish speaking countries for different years of my life, in Spain, then in Mexico, and then started traveling to Cuba and getting to know the place where I was born. And that's what led to the inspiration to write the book, Letters from Cuba, that I'll be talking about now. This is my new book, and it's also también se puede leer en español, Cartas de Cuba, so it's in both languages. And anyway, this book is inspired by my grandmother's story. My maternal grandmother, she was a Polish Jewish immigrant who got to Cuba in the late 20s, and she helped to bring the whole family over from Poland to Cuba right on the eve of the war, right on the eve of the Holocaust. So she really was a very instrumental in saving her family, saving that side of the family. And I always heard that story from my grandmother. Her name was Esther. And I always heard that story from her. And I wanted to honor her because she had saved her family. And as a result, she saved all of her descendants, including me. And so I wanted to honor that. And so Letters from Cuba takes that story and, of course, fictionalizes it, makes her a little younger than she was in real life. And she's in Cuba with her father. And they're struggling to figure out how they're going to bring the whole family over to Cuba, just like so many immigrant stories today. But we don't usually hear about immigrants going to Cuba. We hear about immigrants leaving Cuba. But at that time, immigrants were going to Cuba, and so many Jewish people found a refuge and a sanctuary in Cuba, thanks to the tolerance of the Cuban people and their openness to people of different backgrounds and different religions. And so in the story, Esther is in the countryside with her father. They're living in a small town called Agramonte. And I said it in Agramonte. This is in the province of Matanzas because my family actually lived in that town. My grandmother's family settled in that town. They were the only Jewish people in this town where they grew sugar. And I always thought that was so fascinating. So I went and did some research in Agramonte and found out a lot of interesting things about the town and legends also that remain to this day in this town. And it's a town with a very important Afro-Cuban presence and Afro-Cuban religious presence. So I learned a lot about that. And I went to ceremonies, what they're called bembes in Cuba, and got to know a lot about the religion and the culture. So all of that gets woven into the story of Esther because she gets to know that world while she's living in Agramonte. And she's telling this whole story to her sister. So the whole book is written as letters that she's writing to her sister and kind of telling her all about Cuba and her hopes that her sister will eventually be able to get to Cuba from Poland. And I could tell you more, but I want to, of course, let Jorge tell us about his story. So I'll stop there, but I'm very honored that the book won a prize for inspirational story. So thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Ruth. And we're going to get into a question and answer afterwards. Si nos están viendo algunas personas en español o ambos autores son bilingües, español-inglés. But for the moment, we're going to go next with Jorge Dueñas. Let me go ahead and introduce you. Jorge Dueñas is the author of Disciplina con dignidad, 7 días a la semana. He was born in Marysville, California, but grew up in Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico. He grew up in a migrant farm laborer family. So his family traveled between California, Oregon, and Washington to work in the fields. Later in life, Jorge obtained 3 bachelors of arts and a master's degree in education. He has been an educator and public speaker for the past 35 years. He presently lives in Northern California with his family. His goal with his writing is to make a difference to other people in their lives, as writing has done to him. Welcome, Jorge.
Les voy a hablar español. Si tienen alguna pregunta, por favor, hágala en inglés. You can also ask me the questions in English.
All right.
Quiero decir que para mí es un honor estar aquí con ustedes. Buenos días, buenas tardes, porque sé que hay gente que viene de otros países. Quiero decirles un poquito sobre mí. Regularmente no hablo de mí, hablo sobre los programas que hago, pero quiero decirles que nací en Marysville, California. Ahorita soy maestro en Marysville. Mi papá, como muchos migrantes, pensaban todo el tiempo regresarse a su tierra porque trabajaban muy duro. Mi papá trabajaba desde las 5 de la mañana, a veces hasta las 8 de la noche, y a veces que durante la noche, porque vivíamos en el mismo campo donde trabajábamos. Juntaron un poco de dinero, nos fuimos a Guadalajara, vivimos en Guadalajara, estudiamos en Guadalajara, mi papá se vino para acá. Se me olvidó totalmente el inglés, aprendí el español, y un día, bajo el régimen de un presidente mexicano, Echeverría, perdimos todo. Entonces nos regresamos de nuevo al norte de California y trabajamos en el campo. Me tocó piscar durazno, jitomate, fuimos a la cereza, a la manzana. Nunca veía el comienzo del año escolar y nunca veía el final del año escolar. Pero había dos cosas o varias cosas que sucedían en mi casa. Una era de que mi mamá todo el tiempo nos contaba historias. Y eso se convirtió en algo muy importante. Entonces, una de mis licenciaturas es en literatura. Algunas veces eran historias de la familia, cosas que había pasado durante niña. A veces eran hasta películas que había visto de niña, pero se convirtieron en importantes. Entonces, el hablar, la comunicación, las historias, el hacernos pensar, se convirtió en algo importante. No había televisión, así que decía, mamá, cuéntanos otra historia. Y había veces que ya habíamos escuchado la misma historia 1000 veces. La segunda cosa que sucedió que era muy importante en mi vida y siempre fue importante es de que cuando estábamos en la escuela, que ya ingresamos a la escuela, había una maestra que tomaba el tiempo y en una bolsita nos ponía libros y nos decía, lean ese libro cuando vayan en el camino. La verdad, para mí se convirtió en importante. Yo lo leía mis libros, los libros de mi hermana, los libros de mi hermano. Y entonces eso comenzó a despertar un gran interés también por la escritura, porque cuando ya había leído los libros varias veces, decía, yo voy a escribir mi propia historia. Entonces escribía y nomás los iba guardando, y hasta ahorita los seguía guardando hasta que mis hijos me animaron a publicar este libro. Soy maestro, soy educador. Cuando escribí el libro, que es Disciplina con Dignidad, es uno de los 70 libros que están en la computadora. Escribo lo que siento y lo que veo y lo que he vivido. El libro nunca fue el interés de agarrar dinero, de hacerme millonario, de recibir un premio. Mi libro era decirle a la gente que había una posibilidad de cambiar las cosas y la dirección de las cosas que podemos hacer. No nos podemos enfocar en las cosas que no tenemos o los problemas, porque si nos encerramos en los problemas, sabes que no salimos y no podemos hacer un cambio. El libro se trata de que podemos mover 1 milímetro a la derecha las cosas y el resultado va a ser diferente que si nos quedamos en el mismo lugar donde estamos. O sea, nos podemos sentar ahí, quejarnos de todo lo que está pasando mal todo el año, día por día, pero si no hacemos un cambio a la dirección de las cosas que hacemos, no va a suceder el cambio. Entonces, de cierta manera, somos dueños de nuestro propio destino. Y la manera que lo hacemos, y hablo en el libro, es de que analizamos lo que queremos hacer, hacemos un plan de lo que queremos hacer, vemos lo que tenemos en ese momento y decidimos un paso a la vez qué es lo que vamos a cambiar para que cambie la dirección de las cosas que están pasando. He vivido, le estaba contando al principio que tengo 3 licenciaturas. Una es en la parte de leyes, iba a ser abogado, pero un día decidí que iba a cambiar la dirección de los estudiantes. Dije, antes de que se presenten en la corte, a ver si los puedo cambiar. Y mi meta era 5 años. 5 años se convirtieron en 10. 10 en 15, 20, 25. Y este año estoy en mi 36 años de educador. He estado desde kinder hasta el colegio, la universidad, director, pero mi amor para la enseñanza es más grande que estar dirigiendo la escuela. Así que vengo, enseño. El señor Becerra estaba hablando que daba libros. Son cosas que son importantes. Necesitan creer que pueden cambiar el mundo. Necesitan creer que pueden cambiar las cosas que están pasando. Yo soy una estadística que no resultó y no está en ese nivel. Así que si yo la quebré, la pueden quebrar todos. Vengo de una familia campesina. Mi papá nunca fue a la escuela, no sabía escribir ni leer más que su nombre. Mi mamá fue hasta el 5º grado. No hablaba en inglés. No veía el principio del año, el final del año. Entonces las estadísticas decían que no debería estar donde estoy. Así que si escuchamos eso, no vamos a cambiar las cosas que hacemos. Así que no necesitan comprar el libro, sino necesitan creer en ustedes mismos. Necesitan hacer ese cambio. Porque si hacen ese cambio y una palabra que diga Ruth, una palabra que escuchen aquí, cambia la dirección de las cosas que hacen, entonces vale la pena lo que se hizo. Así que no voy a tomar más tiempo. Aquí se dice que nunca se me da un micrófono porque no lo suelto. Pero esta vez me voy a callar un momentito.
Hey, pues muchas gracias. Thank you both for telling us a little bit about yourself and wow, like one of the things that Jorge mentioned, una de las cosas que acaba de mencionar Jorge and applies to both of you is the fact that well, actually applies to many of us because I'm also included with the fact that when you are living in a specific area and then your family moves somewhere else, your parents still have the mentality and your family has the mentality to go back one day, but that day is just probably never comes. But yeah, well, this is the nature of moving and migrating to other places, but it's a learning experience. It's how we grow by learning, knowing and traveling. It's if we really want to grow, that's the way to do it, like understanding other places. Now let's get into a little discussion here. And I know, Edward, I'm gonna go ahead and allow you to comment on the information from the authors.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your stories. Muchísimas gracias por dinos de sus historias, de sus familias, about your history, your families. Ruth, I'll start with you. It's so important for families to share their familial history. So I'm so glad that you've written this book because we all need to know what our parents and our grandparents went through to make us successful. And that's part of the story, that for us to be successful, we've got to get that inspiration from our parents and our grandparents. And I think what you've done is beautifully share what your grandmother wrote and what you've written in your letters from Cuba. So thank you very much for that, because it's history of your family is critical for our success, I believe. So thank you for that. You were talking about the accident that and that during that year that you were in a body cast, you the school sent you a tutor and you started reading. Is that when you started reading more, or were you already reading a lot prior to the accident, when reading was really one of the only things that you could do while in the body cast?
Yeah, a little bit of both. Well, first, I want to thank you for saying that about family stories and family history. I totally agree with you, and I think it's so important to learn those stories and pass them on. And that's really what I wanted to do in Letters from Cuba, and to know, like, really, like, that, you know, that thanks to my grandmother, I am here, you know, thanks to the courage that she had to take a ship all by herself across the ocean and go from Poland to Cuba. It's just like unbelievable to think of what she did, and all the courage that it took to you know, to just, you know, start a new life in Cuba and try to save everybody. So that's so important. So thank you for that. And then with regard to the story in Lucky Broken Girl, I was definitely starting to be interested in reading when the accident happened. I was 10, but definitely it made a big difference to have the books brought to the house, to have the tutor pay attention to me. I think my English was just starting to get good at that point. I was like being moved out of that class into just a regular, quote unquote, class about that time. But I still didn't feel totally confident. And so I think strangely, even though it was so terrible, obviously, to be in a body cast and not be able to move for all that time and have my mother had to take care of me and everything. And it was so scary for the whole family because they just, they didn't know, like, would I walk again? Would I recover? Would I be a regular little girl? I mean, there were, the whole family was so worried about it. And when you think about the fact that we had just fled Cuba, so there we had, left a country to come to a new country. And now here was this girl who couldn't leave her bed at all. What that must have felt like to my parents and grandparents and the whole family. It was so scary. But books were really a salvation for me. That's what I remember, that I started reading a lot more because I was a big hopscotch player when I was younger, when I was a little kid, and my brother and other people remember this. I was, so in the book, the girl is named Ruthie because that's what everybody used to call me, Ruthie or Ruti. And so she's a big hopscotch player. She's the hopscotch queen of queens, and she just loves to play hopscotch, which was the way I was like. So I think I was very active, the way a child would be at that age, at 9, 10 years old. But then I couldn't be active anymore. But the books kind of gave me that possibility of dreaming, of imagining myself in other places. I liked Nancy Drew mysteries because I love the idea of solving mysteries. And of course I had nothing to do with Nancy Drew. I didn't look like her. I wasn't like her, but still it was this idea, like a girl who could be, strong and empowered and could figure out mysteries. And the teacher brought me, the whole sort of series of Nancy Drew mysteries. And so I got really good at reading because I had a teacher to work with me one-on-one, which was really, a luxury to have that. I got better at math also because we were working on math problems. And I just remember she would bring, magazines like Highlights, and then we would also go through the newspaper, and it was the mid-60s and a lot was going on. Martin Luther King, I mean, so much was going on at that time. And I was learning, current events and things like that. She'd bring a newspaper, we would analyze it, she'd bring books. And just, that's, I think, also when I came to really appreciate teaching and education, because I saw, how much just one teacher could make such a difference, in the life of a young person. In this case, me, I think if I hadn't had that, I'm not sure how I would have survived that year. I think it made a huge difference.
So I'm assuming that all the books that the tutor brought you were in English.
They were in English. I don't think that there was the possibility at that time of acquiring a lot of books in Spanish, So, I like to think that maybe she brought me, Jose Marti, the great Cuban poet, and so on, but I don't think so. And I know that my parents, only had a couple of books in the house, history books, a couple of books that they had, and some books they had brought from Cuba. But that was basically it. There wasn't a lot more. But the Spanish came to me from the stories that I heard from my grandparents, from my parents, from the music, because the family liked to listen to a lot of Cuban music. So I grew up hearing, cha-cha-cha and, boleros and, so I got the Spanish that way. The Spanish kind of came more from, from the music, the folklore, the stories. So it was always there, and to this day, fortunately, my parents are still alive in their late 80s. And we only talk in Spanish, when we're at home, if we're not with other people who don't speak Spanish, hablamos en español, it's just like it just feels the most natural to us.
Well, the story that you shared is the story that we often talk to our parents about when we're going out and providing free books. And the two stories that I'd like to share is that when you read, it opens up your imagination and anything is possible. And it really ties into what Jorge was talking about, that your mind, you use your mind to go anywhere you want. And that's what our imagination does. And that's what comes from reading books. And that's what hopefully provides us the inspiration to move forward, as Jorge was talking about. So it's up to us, but reading opens up all those avenues. So thank you very much for that. And, going back to one of your comments, that the inspirational story that your grandmother took on to move the family from Poland to Cuba was just beautiful. That's a hero story in itself. So, so thank you for sharing that portion of it with us. The second thing that we always tell our families is that reading is the key to success in school, and school is the key to success in life. So we share both of those points with our parents to try to, and we do that especially when a kid will comment, well, I don't like to read. And that just kicks me off, and I say reading is the key to success in school. So anyway, thank you so much. Ana, any?
Thank you.
Can I add a comment to what you said, Mr.
Yes.
Becerra? See, when I was getting my books, they were in English also. Mm-hmm. It was when the theory, bilingual education had not come in yet, and they thought that by deflating one language, the other one was going to increase. So they made Spanish sound like it was the worst thing that you could do. So and some of our parents did believe that because whatever the school said, it was important. So they would force us to forget what we had instead of using it as a tool. So, and when we read some books and they talk about Mexico, it wasn't the Mexico that I knew. It was like everything was modern here, and then suddenly we went to Mexico and they were in burros and there were no streets. But my experience had taught me that it was different. I came from a city that there were cars in every direction. But books is the key. The more they read, and it doesn't matter what language, just read.
Yes.
Well, and I grew up in an English-only environment. My parents spoke Spanish. They were both born here in the United States, but they both spoke Spanish. But my parents were under the assumption of what Jorge just said, that they wanted me to speak English so that I could compete in school with all the English speakers and do well. And they would always tell me, we want you to do well in school and go on to college because we don't want you working the way we work in a low-paying job. So, and when that comes up in some of my discussions, what I will tell parents is that the whole belief system has changed, as Jorge was talking about. Back then it was, yes, speak English and melt into the existing society. But things have changed. The studies that have been made on bilingualism prove that exactly wrong. Prove that the bilingual person is stronger, is more independent, is their cognitive abilities is stronger, and therefore, bilingual is the way to go. When kids or parents tell me, well, yeah, we want our kids to learn English, I tell them, all the cities, all the states, the federal government, and many companies pay an employee more when you are bilingual, when you know more than one language. And I tell the parent, I look at them and I tell them, ¿Quién no va a querer ganar más dinero? Who does not want to earn more money? So if you can get a bilingual job that pays you extra over and above what the single language person is earning, hey, bring the money, bring the money. So it's very important from that standpoint. I'll go to Jorge now. Muchísimas gracias por su historia, de su familia, de lo que cree en la educación. La educación es tan importante y leer es parte de la educación de nuestros niños. Y por eso les digo a los papás, sus niños tienen que leer 15 minutos cada día, y sus niños van a ser mucho más inteligentes que el otro niño que no lee. So, y como estaba diciendo más temprano, de leer es la llave del éxito de la escuela, y la escuela es la llave del éxito de la vida. So, nosotros estamos promoting
Promoviendo.
School and reading. So, muchísimas gracias por su historia. Le iba a preguntar usted fue maestro de qué grado en la escuela, y porque también dijo que usted fue director de una escuela, ¿verdad?
Sí, cuando estuve en la universidad, todos mis amigos querían, cuando fui a la universidad, fui del norte de California. De 21,000 estudiantes, éramos 48 hispanos. Entonces nos juntamos, hicimos un grupo que se llamaba Mecha y nos conocíamos, y la mayoría no eran ni de esta área, venían del área de Los Ángeles, pero éramos un número tan pequeño. Entonces todos queríamos estudiar para abogados porque íbamos a hacer una diferencia, y todos se querían ir del área. Yo comencé a trabajar con un programa que se llama Minicore, que trabajaba con los niños migrantes. Y la mera verdad, cuando fui a agarrar el trabajo, le dije al director, mira, no me gustan los niños, yo no quiero ser maestro, pero si no agarro un trabajo, no voy a poder estar aquí. Entonces lo que sucedió es de que me dieron el trabajo. Y cuando fui ahí, estaban 3 estudiantes en la parte de atrás copiando una enciclopedia. Y me recordó cuando yo estaba en la escuela, que también me sentaban a copiar enciclopedias sin un sentido de nada. Entonces le pregunté al maestro y me dice, es que dice, así no me molestan. Y eso fue lo que me enfureció un poco. Entonces fui a hablar con el director y fui a la universidad y me dice, bueno, quiere hacer diferencia a este maestro. Pero no quería dejar mis otras carreras. Entonces agarré una tercera licenciatura, porque según iba a hacer una diferencia. Cuando terminé, iba a enseñar literatura en la high school porque quería irme a enseñar literatura en la universidad. Esa era mi meta. Entonces Meresville me contrató, pero yo tenía las 2 credenciales y terminé enseñando kinder porque ocupaba mi credencial porque los habían encontrado fuera de compliance. Entonces, de la high school estoy enseñando kinder, lo único que toco la guitarra, y eso me salvó la vida, porque no volvería a enseñar kinder. Entonces, después me fui, estuve enseñando 4º y 5º grado, y mi mejor grado fue el 6º grado, porque les podía enseñar escritura, lectura y todo lo que quería enseñar. Estuve enseñando en el colegio, estaba enseñando a gobierno y estaba enseñando también literatura. Me regresé de director y ahorita enseño 6º y 7º grado. Nunca me fui a la parte de leyes, pero uso todo lo que aprendí de leyes y de negocios en lo que enseño aquí. Mi meta es animarlos y a veces quebrar las creencias que tienen de que no pueden llegar. Porque muchas veces escuché cuando hablaba con mis amigos que decían ellos, ¿cuántos doctores mexicanos ves? Y la verdad, ninguno. ¿Cuántos abogados mexicanos ves? Ninguno. Pero no había ninguna razón por qué no ser nosotros los primeros. Cuando fui por mi maestría, llegué y pienso que la mitad de la universidad eran hispanos. Para mí fue entrar a un mundo nuevo, era diferente, increíble. Así que hemos hecho un progreso muy grande. Estamos, como dijo Ruth, de cuando nos ponían en una clase de educación especial porque éramos deficientes en cultura y teníamos un lenguaje diferente, a competir ahorita por posiciones más avanzadas en las clases. Porque si los maestros no creen, a veces que los estudiantes tampoco. El maestro tiene que creer que cada estudiante puede llegar a hacer lo máximo que ellos pueden llegar. Y si los estudiantes me están escuchando ahorita, no hay límites, ningún límite. Siempre hay una meta donde llegar, nunca se va en dirección derecha. Hay veces que son curvas tras curvas, pero necesita uno saber a dónde quiere llegar. Pero necesita uno creer y necesita uno querer llegar a ese punto. ¿Cuál es la meta? En mi libro hablo sobre qué hacer mis tiempos libres, porque hay veces que me dice la familia, no, pero es que no sé dónde empezar. Y les digo, miren, si no saben qué hacer y tienen todo este tiempo y no tienen dinero, agarren unos tacos, se van a la universidad, caminen, nadie los va a detener, caminan, entren a la biblioteca. Y siempre les decía, como les hablaba a mis hijos, no les digo si llegas a venir aquí, les decía, cuando vengas aquí, Y eso funcionó. Mis hijos todos se fueron a la universidad, todos han sido profesionales. Íbamos cada verano, visitamos una universidad diferente. Y siempre les decía lo mismo, cuando vengas aquí. Y los hacía que se sintieran que esa era su casa. Porque no les puedo decir que sueñen en algo que no han visto. Así que...
Y ahora tengo dos palabras nuevas para hablar con nuestras familias, creer y querer. Me gustó eso. So, and I think Amada has a question.
Yes, let's go into the question from Amada. You can unmute yourself and go ahead and ask a question.
Okay, let me see if I'm unmuted.
And I can probably...
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Just one moment. I'm gonna see if she can join with her video. Just allowing her for video.
Ruth, is
Hi.
Ruth there?
Yes.
Hey.
Hi, I'm
Hey,
so
it's
glad
so
you're
good to-
here.
It's so good to see you and hear you and know that your book has won an award. I'm sure it's very well deserved.
Oh,
I know. And and your other books too are just wonderful. So I just wanted to say that your story is so moving, so touching. And it reminds me a little bit about Frida Kahlo, when she was when she had to lay in bed for years and look at all she produced, you know. The only thing she could do was draw and paint, and that's what she did. And what you did was read and look at what it led to. Your writing, your beautiful writing, inspirational to so many. Me encanta que hablas español con tu familia también. Yo también así lo hacía con mi mamá, que descanse en paz. Pero qué lindo verte, Ruth, y Jorge también. Qué bonito escuchar tu historia y que mucha inspiración para nuestra gente, para las familias.
Muchas gracias.
Sí, les quiero preguntar cuáles son sus proyectos futuros, qué más van a hacer. Los dos. What are you going to do next?
Jorge, okay. Amada, muchas gracias por estar aquí. Me dio tanta alegría cuando vi tu nombre y ver que estabas aquí con nosotros. Muchas gracias, de verdad. Te lo agradezco de todo corazón y todo lo que dijiste, todas las palabras que dijiste son preciosas. Muchas gracias. Really. No, so, you know, I'm very excited to tell you especially that my new book is going to be a picture book. I have a picture book coming out in January. So I'm very excited about that. And it's coming out simultaneously in English and Spanish. It's Tía Fortuna's New Home, or El Nuevo Hogar de Tía Fortuna.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
Who's publishing it?
This is with Penguin Random House. It'll be coming out in January. Yeah. Y trata de una señora mayor que tiene que dejar su casa en Miami, que ella vive al lado de la playa, pero van a demoler todas las casas en esa zona para hacer un hotel de lujo. Entonces ella se tiene que ir. Y entonces está su sobrina, la sobrinita Estrella, está con la tía Fortuna acompañándola el último día en su casa. Se va a mudar a una nueva casa, que no es exactamente una casa, es un hogar para los ancianos, pero ella lo llama la casa de los viejitos. Entonces la tía le dice a la niña, voy a la casa de los viejitos. Y la niña la acompaña y la ayuda a mudarse y a empezar de nuevo en su nueva casa. Así que eso es lo nuevo que tengo.
Beautiful, Ruth.
Thank you.
It's very realistic too.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun writing it, and I have to say it wasn't easy to write a picture book,
No.
As you know, they're very hard to write. They're very, you have
Yeah.
to, every word counts. And
Yeah.
it was definitely, I mean, I had fun writing it, but it went through a lot of revisions to get it
Sure.
to feel right. So
Yeah.
that was a fun experience.
Oh, I definitely understand that with all of my books. Oh my gosh.
I
I have
know.
I have 7 books now, and I know how hard it is to remove words, to make fewer and fewer and fewer words, and just pick the ones that are going to tell the story the best. It's hard. It's rough.
Yeah.
But you know, the ones that continue to do extremely well are My Very Own Room and My Diary from Here to There, because
Oh.
it's an immigration story. So they're still selling. All of my books are still in print. And it's been 20 years since my first picture book, My
That's
Very Own Room.
great. Well, I'm not surprised, pero muchas felicidades. That's great.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Ruth.
Bueno,
And what
Pues
about
como
Jorge?
y
Oh.
para mí, tengo un libro que terminé, lo escribí para mi mamá, nunca lo leyó ella, falleció antes de ir, se llama El Rebozo, y en realidad es un evento de mi mamá cuando dejó México para acá y por razones de migración no pudieron regresar, así que mi abuelita falleció y ella mantuvo ese rebozo. Entonces cuando se lo dio a mi hermana no entendió el significado de qué significaba. Ella pensaba que este era un trapo viejo, pero hay veces que hay ciertos artículos que nos detienen y nos mantienen con la historia de la familia y nos recuerdan, ese recuerdo es tan importante. Y ese rebozo, falleció mi mamá hace 10 años y ese rebozo yo lo tengo. Cuando falleció, mi hermana me lo dio porque quería que publicara ese libro. Y la verdad, lo mandé el libro a 2 casas de publicación, no lo levantaron, pero ahorita tengo ganas de volverlo a mandar para tratar. Y estoy escribiendo 2 libros, los 2 los llevo en progreso. Uno se titula Negocio, Negocios, Negocios. Tengo una oficina del norte de California y les ayudamos a los negocios hispanos a hacer un estudio del área, agarrar licencias, abrir los negocios, evaluar los negocios y tratar de mantenerlos, o sea, tratar de hacer un cambio con lo que hacemos, en vez de ser los trabajadores, que sean los dueños de su negocio. Y el que escribo a diario se titula Soy gordo y lo sé. Y se trata de perspectivas, cómo nos ve la gente. Porque hay veces que llega alguien y lo ve hispano y luego ven que no habla inglés y la gente piensa, oh, no es inteligente, comienza a pensar de otra manera. Entonces, aunque cuando me ven, siempre les pregunto, ¿qué es lo primero que ven? Entonces, sobre eso hablo. Y empezó a ser sobre mí y se convirtió en una colección de historias de diferentes personas, de eventos que pasaron. Y lo que trato de hacer con ese libro es de hacer que piensen un poquito que a veces que no es lo que ven a lo que es. Mi trabajo más grande en mi escritura, como les digo, tengo 75 libros en la computadora.
Wow.
Creo que me di por vencido después de que recibí 2 cartas de rechazo. Entonces ahorita tengo un hijo que salió del Army, que es también maestro, y él me dice, vamos a mandarlos. Así que estoy más animado. Si dicen que no, pues dicen que no.
Oh, qué bueno, yeah. Siempre tenemos que tener otro libro y en cuanto lo mandamos, empezar otro. O sea,
Muchas gracias.
¿verdad, Ruth?
Es verdad, es totalmente verdad. Y Jorge, a mí me rechazaron muchas veces también, o sea que no te aceptan así como así, hay que seguir, bueno, como sabe, amada Irma, hay que seguir tratando y tratando con esa esperanza de que al fin vamos a encontrar una persona que nos entiende y quiere publicar nuestra obra. Pero no es fácil, pero es posible. No hay que perder la esperanza, hay que
gracias.
seguir adelante siempre.
Y esa va a ser mi meta antes de diciembre. Voy a comenzar a mandar mis libros. A ver qué sucede.
Yeah. Ruth, can you tell a little bit about Macondo, since we are both Macondistas?
Oh, of course.
There may be other people out there that would like to
Be
become
interested. Well, the Macondo Writers Workshop definitely fits in with all the topics that we've been talking about, literacy and reading, and how important it is to be surrounded by books and to share books with young people. And it's a workshop founded by Sandra Cisneros, and it's an incredible writers' workshop. The workshop takes place every year in San Antonio, usually around late July, the very end of July. And so the workshops, I mean, it's really expanded now over the years, but so there are workshops in fiction and poetry, in nonfiction. There are also short seminars that are taught, and you apply to the workshop. And then if you're accepted, you get to go and attend the workshop and also go to the seminars. You can also work one-on-one with authors. I did that this past year. I was a mentor for an author. I did a one-on-one, and now we also, I think, children's books, children's writing for children is also you and Renee have also been offering that. So that's also kind of expanded. But it's a beautiful workshop because the center of it is compassion, having compassion for one another, for our readers, for ourselves, and doing compassionate work as writers, and writing also that has to do with our communities and with social justice. That's a very important focus of the workshop as well. So I don't know, Amada, I'm probably leaving things out if you want to add more to that.
Well, through our writing, we also heal ourselves, heal each other, and can heal the world. So, you know, we have really high aspirations, but we all work towards that goal of making a difference in our communities, in our lives. And so it's a wonderful, wonderful workshop. I think I have attended maybe 6 times. I'm not even sure, I've lost count, but it's a wonderful, inspirational time, and time with other authors. So we get to be with our own tribe, you know, with our own group of people that understand each other. We understand about being rejected. We understand about how hard it is to take a book all the way to publication. So it's a wonderful thing. So anybody out there that's listening, look it up. You can find it at macondoworkshop.org.
I think it's maybe .com, Macondo Writers Workshop.
Macondo.
It has a new website now, and it's beautiful with a lot of information about how the workshop developed over the years. It started in the kitchen of Sandra Cisneros at her home in San Antonio. So it started as a very, very homey thing with Sandra basically taking people on and mentoring them. And now it's grown into this really lovely, bigger workshop. A lot of the authors are Latino authors, but not only, they're people of all backgrounds, and that's really beautiful. And what Amada just said, that we really, when we're together, we really form a community and help each other. It was virtual this year because of the pandemic, but hopefully next year it'll be live. But it's really wonderful how everybody helps each other and supports each other as writers.
Well, thank you both for sharing about the Macondo. I want to mention that on Facebook we have somebody, that's Jenny, who wanted to ask a question, and this I guess applies to everybody, because you know, she says that how much research is involved into all of this, because for example, Ruth's book, she had to make research about her grandmother, and Jorge, your book, oh my God, I don't know how much research you did, but it probably was years of looking into the education system, because you have questions that you ask in your book and activities as well. So if we can go on and ask some of that, and then Amada, you can also share if you like.
Thank
you. Yeah,
okay,
let's go with you first.
In Spanish or English. Tomó mucha investigación para mí. Lo que sucedió es de que había ciertas costumbres en mi casa que venían, que dice la gente, son culturales, de cómo uno disciplina en la casa y las expectativas que tenía que ver con disciplina. En mi casa, la palabra disciplina significaba castigo o era algo negativo. Cuando llegaba mi abuelo, le decía a mi papá, disciplina a esos muchachos, significaba que iba a haber una reacción. Entonces, cuando yo tuve mi familia, adapté muchas de esas costumbres que ya venían en la familia hasta que un día me detuve. Me recuerdo que hubo un problema con uno de mis hijos y le pegué. Y después hice lo mismo que hacían en la casa. Iba y le dije, me dolió más a mí que a ti. Pero, y cuando dije eso, me recordé a mí. Dije, yo muchas veces pensé, ¿cómo que le dolió más a usted que a mí? Y comencé a analizar la situación. Entonces pensé, no aprendí, no recordaba por qué me habían pegado. Recordaba que me habían pegado, pero no sabía por qué. Entonces decían, no aprendí nada de eso. Entonces ese día comencé a hacer algo que no hacía para el área de educación. Fui, investigué, vi un programa de disciplina en la televisión y dije, voy a ir ahí. Me subí a un avión y terminé en Colorado. Estuve ahí por varios días en un entrenamiento donde me dijeron, haz esto otro, haz esto otro, y los resultados va a ser 1, 2, 3. Llego a mi casa con todos estos materiales que compré y no funcionó. Los resultados eran 5, 6, 7. Y dije, ok, el programa no sirvió, pero a lo mejor era yo. Entonces me comencé a comunicar por teléfono con la escritora y me dijo, oh, dice, la teoría, y comienza a hablarme de teoría. Entonces a la siguiente semana termino con otro programa en San Diego y lo mismo. Entonces tomó tiempo para aprender de que nadie me podía enseñar lo que yo necesitaba hacer. Nadie conocía a mis hijos, nadie sabía mi situación y nadie traía la parte cultural. Entonces yo tuve que parar y analizar las cosas. Hice un programa de 6 puntos y cuando presento les digo eso. Si vienen aquí a que yo les diga cómo disciplinar, están en el lugar equivocado. El programa lo desarrolla uno mismo poniendo las metas que uno quiere lograr, tomando disciplina como una manera de enseñanza. Y siempre les digo, la disciplina se enseña igual como enseñar es matemática, lectura, escritura. Necesita ver una meta. De otra manera se sienta uno ahí y es como tirar todos los dardos a ver cuántos quedan en el centro y por dónde cayeron los demás. Necesita tener un enfoque y como les dije al principio, a veces que se va en curva todo esto, pero uno tiene uno que estar enfocado porque vale la pena, porque hay una razón. Y la razón es llegar a nuestros hijos a que logren ser productivos y que logren las metas que quieren ellos llegar. Entonces, tomó mucho tiempo para escribirlo. Y la verdad es de que comencé a hacer presentaciones y la gente, algunas personas que me están viendo ahorita, ellos son los que me motivaron a escribirlo porque siempre me decían, ¿y el libro cuándo sale? ¿Y el libro cuándo sale? Y dije, ok, déjeme ponerlo pues en un libro. Y ya cuando lo terminé, mi hijo fue el que dijo, pues, ¿qué no lo ibas a publicar? Y lo mandé a 2 compañías y parece que no les gustaron, entonces lo sacamos por Amazon. Y hemos seguido trabajando así. Como les dije a mi hijo, mi mente nunca fue agarrar nombres, hacerme famoso, hacer dinero, sino quiero un día pensar que las cosas que yo hice hicieron una diferencia, que no nomás tomé espacio, que puedo hacer la cosa que algunas personas hicieron en mi vida, que se convirtieron en el factor X para cambiar la dirección de mi vida. Y es como podemos mejorar las cosas que hacemos.
That's great. Well said. I really like how you talk about that because you mentioned something about discipline that mencionaste que la disciplina a ti la miraban como un castigo, and throughout my childhood there were some things that it shouldn't be said as de castigo vas a hacer esto. It shouldn't be something that to be disciplined with the negative side of it, but still it was. So Ruth, how about you, the research on your book?
Yeah, well, that was so moving, Jorge, gracias, muy conmovedor. Well, I think as writers, we're kind of doing research from the time that we're children. Research in the sense of observing everything around us, listening to the language that people are using, listening to stories. I think writers have that sort of sixth sense. Like we're always doing research. We're always like interested in learning and remembering things. From the time that maybe I was 11, I kept a diary and I would note things down that I would hear. And so I think research is kind of like a part of our lives in a way as writers. We're just very observant people. But I did do like actual what we call, research in the normal sense of the word, from my book Letters from Cuba, because there was, of course, all the stories that my grandmother told and the family told. So kind of there was all the family history and the family research. But then I also went to Cuba. I've been traveling to Cuba over the last 30 years. I've gone many times, not very much with the support of my family, who don't really want me to go. They don't think it's a good place to go to. They think it's a scary place to go. But nevertheless, I've been going and doing a lot of research in Cuba on life there today, and to write this book because I was going to set it in the countryside in this little town of Agramonte. I thought, well, I can't just write about it just from the memories. I have to go see what Agramonte is like today. And fortunately, I have a friend here in the United States who I met in Cuba, and then eventually he left, and he and his family are from Agramonte. So he called up his cousins, and I stayed with his cousins in Agramonte in a house with a family there in Agramonte, and really got to know the town and got to know this place and talked to people. So I was kind of being the anthropologist and listening to people's stories and going to the religious ceremonies, and all of that research really became part of the book. And I also did some research on Jewish history in that period, in the 20s and 30s, and that whole period, right before World War II. So a lot of things that I didn't know about that time, I also, needed to research because my book is historical fiction. So I needed to know what was going on in several places, in Cuba, in the United States, in Europe, all during that time. So I tried to bring in all of that information without making it too heavy because, I'm writing for young people. Even if I was writing for old people, I'd still not want to make it too heavy because, you still want it to be a story, so that was one of the challenges for me, was how to weave in all of that background and everything that was going on, and the rise of Nazis in the 30s. And there was even a Cuban Nazi party that I found out about, so that there were, some people that were very racist and anti-Semitic at that time, but it was really the minority in Cuba because most Cubans are extremely tolerant of differences. But I had to learn about all of that myself so that then I could feel confident. How am I going to write from the perspective of a girl in the 1930s if I haven't done all that background work? So a lot of reading and thinking went into creating the story.
For me, I also, well, can I speak now?
Yes, just briefly if you can, because there's a meeting I gotta attend to 12.
Yes, I did do research also for my books, for all of them. When I wrote my diary From Here to There, mi diario de aquí hasta allá, about our family's immigration story, I first went to the library, my best friend, and I checked out like 12 books on moving, 12 books on traveling, making the journey from one place to another, even books that would seem to not inform, what I was going to write, because it was about Pilgrim Girls, or I can't remember that series, but all these different books that I found on immigration, never any immigration from Mexico, as though it didn't exist. And so to write my book, I read some of those stories, just to help me think of how I was going to write mine. And then after I finished, put them all away, took them back to the library and sat down to write my book. So that was one way that I did research in order to make a better book.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for sharing. I ran out of time, so I gotta get going now. I'm very glad that you all were able to join, and all the information is going to be available at lbff.us.
Yay.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Muchas gracias.
We'll see you
Muchísimas
next time.
Muchas
gracias.
gracias. Adiós.
Gracias.
This
Ana.
session was sponsored by my Point Credit Union, helping individuals, families, and local businesses and everybody in between to make the things they love to do. mypointcreditunion.com. You can go to our website, lbff.us, for more information. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Gracias.
Bye.